They saw it the moment she stepped onto the base. The patch on her right shoulder, a badger head, stitched in black and rust, worn at the edges from years of field use. It wasn't regulation. It wasn't even supposed to exist anymore. The badger unit had been dissolved 6 years ago after a failed border extraction. Officially, every record of it had been archived under irrecoverable, yet here it was, snarling quietly from the arm of a captain who walked like she didn't care if anyone approved. Whispers began before she reached the parade ground. "Who let her wear that?" one recruit muttered. "Probably a collector's patch," another said, snickering. They laughed the way people laugh when they don't understand what they're seeing loud enough to cover their unease. Calderon didn't react. Her steps were measured, boots striking the concrete in a rhythm too disciplined to belong to logistics. The morning light caught the faint scratches on her sidearm holster, the kind that came from years of use, not display. When she checked in at the command office, the clerk blinked twice at her transfer file. "You're coming from supply chain operations?" he asked, uncertain. "Yes," she said, her tone clipped but calm. "Reassigned under Directive 72 Alpha." The code meant nothing to him, but the signature at the bottom, Voss, G, made him straighten immediately. "Welcome to Graypoint Training Facility, Captain." She nodded once, took her clearance tag, and walked out. The recruits met her again 2 hours later in the breaching pit. She was in full gear now, not standard issue, not custom either. The harness was older design, heavier webbing, buckles reinforced with paracord. Every inch of her setup looked functional, not pretty. When the instructor called for volunteers to demonstrate a standard wall entry, she stepped forward without waiting. "Permission to execute, sir." Her voice was steady, unassuming, but carried weight. The instructor, a man who'd spent 15 years training soldiers to follow procedure, gave a slow nod. "Proceed." Calderon approached the mock wall, glanced once at the blueprint diagram, and reset the charge positions with small, surgical adjustments. The recruits exchanged confused looks. She was undoing the standard pattern. "That's not the grid," someone whispered. But before the instructor could intervene, the blast thumped through the yard, compact and perfect. She was through the breach before the dust settled, rifle angled low, movement clean and controlled. The instructor stared, silent for a long moment. "That's not how we teach it here," he finally said. "I know," Calderon replied, handing the detonator back. "That's how we survived it elsewhere." The words landed like shrapnel. By the end of the day, the jokes about her patch had doubled. Survived what? Maybe she watched too many training reels. They called her Captain Thrift Store, Patchwork Calderon Relic. But the same recruits who mocked her also found themselves unconsciously watching her movements, the way she checked corners before turning them, the way she never stood with her back to open space. She had the air of someone who'd spent too long in real danger to believe in safety drills. That night, under the humming lights of the barracks, a private named Young whispered to his bunkmate, "You think that patch actually means something?" His bunkmate shrugged. "Maybe she's just sentimental." But Young couldn't shake the look he'd seen in her eyes earlier, not nostalgia, not pride. Something colder. Purpose. Out on the tarmac, long after curfew, Calderon stood alone. The air was still, the hangar lights casting pale gold lines across the asphalt. She touched the patch lightly, tracing the outline of the badger's jaw. It wasn't about memory or rebellion. It was about the ones who hadn't made it back, and the promise that failure wouldn't be buried under bureaucracy. Tomorrow, they'd mock it again. Tomorrow, they'd laugh louder. And tomorrow night, she'd still be standing there, calm, deliberate, unshaken, the badger on her arm, waiting for someone to remember what it once meant to wear it. The training yard had its own kind of noise, not from machinery or drills, but from arrogance echoing off concrete. Mornings began with chest-beating competitions disguised as warm-ups. Young officers in immaculate uniforms compared kill scores, argued about tactical theory they'd never tested, and found new ways to measure who was louder, faster, or more correct. In that kind of environment, silence wasn't just rare, it was suspicious. Captain Inez Calderon was silent. She moved like a shadow through the drills, no wasted steps, no small talk. While others barked about marksmanship techniques, she simply hit the targets, faster, cleaner, and from angles the manual didn't even list. The instructors noticed, but said nothing. The recruits noticed too, and filled the silence with mockery. "Hey, Badger," one of them called out during a live-fire session, his voice dripping with condescension. "You sure that antique patch doesn't jam your trigger?" The others laughed, and Calderon didn't even look up. She reassembled her rifle in 12 seconds flat, then dropped 3 rounds through the bullseye before the laughter stopped echoing. But the noise always returned. It always did. By the end of the second week, she'd become the unit's quiet obsession, the anomaly in a system designed for conformity. She wasn't supposed to be better. She wasn't supposed to be. Yet she was unshakably composed, precise, and indifferent to recognition. That indifference infuriated them. When the breaching rigs malfunctioned during a drill, Calderon didn't wait for maintenance. She crouched beside the panel, stripped the safety lock, and rerouted the circuit manually with nothing but a stripped wire and steady hands. The younger officers stood around, pretending to be unimpressed, their voices brittle. "Guess logistics teaches field repairs now," one muttered. But they all watched because none of them could have done what she did. Her corrections during clearance drills were subtle but surgical. A 2-inch shift in stance here, a reorientation of grip there, details that changed everything about entry speed and target flow. "You're not supposed to adjust instructor protocols," one lieutenant warned her. Calderon's eyes lifted just long enough to meet his. "I'm not adjusting them," she said quietly. "I'm improving them." That shut him up. For the day, at least. The simulator test was supposed to settle things. It was designed for humiliation, a 12-officer hostage extraction that had chewed through entire platoons before. The officers volunteered eagerly when they heard she'd be taking it solo. They wanted proof she wasn't untouchable. When the simulation began, the room dimmed to deep blue. The digital city flickered to life around her, narrow alleys, broken glass, heat signatures layered through smoke. She said nothing over comms. She didn't request support. She just moved. 3 minutes later, the system froze. At first, everyone thought it crashed. But then the results loaded, all 12 hostiles neutralized, no civilian casualties, 0 alerts triggered. The mission timer glitched twice before stabilizing at 3 hours and 9 seconds. No one spoke. The instructor's clipboard hung limp at his side. "She didn't even trigger a camera," he said softly, half to himself. "How's that possible?" In the back of the room, one of the tech specialists was replaying the footage. Every frame was clean, no wasted motion, no deviation. Transitions so fast the sensors lagged behind her actual movements. But that wasn't what froze the tech's hand over the console. At the top of the log, where the system was supposed to record scenario metadata, a single line of text appeared. It wasn't standard. It wasn't even part of the simulation software. Protocol. Relentless. The room fell silent. "Sir, this code isn't part of the system," the tech whispered to the instructor. "It's a restricted tag. Military archives. Task force level." Calderon stood quietly beside the console, helmet tucked under her arm. Her breathing was steady. She didn't explain, didn't deny, didn't react. "Must be a software error," the instructor said quickly, but his voice had thinned out. No one believed him. As the room cleared, one officer muttered, "Relentless. What the hell is that?" Another replied under his breath, "Whatever it is, it remembers her." Outside, the night air was cool and still. Calderon walked past the barracks, her shadow long under the floodlights. Somewhere inside her file, under clearance levels no one in that room could reach, a red flag had been triggered. And for the first time in 6 years, a dormant network identifier lit up across the command servers of the Defense Ministry. TFAR, Relentless, activity detected. The sun had already dipped below the hangar roofs, leaving long bars of amber light stretching across the concrete when the convoy arrived. The sound was low but unmistakable, engines tuned for authority, not speed. 3 SUVs, matte black, no unit markings, no flags. The kind of vehicles that didn't belong to any base, but every soldier knew what their presence meant. Conversations faltered. Jokes died mid-sentence. Even the air seemed to thicken as they rolled to a stop beside the training yard. Captain Inez Calderon was checking the calibration of her rifle sights when the first door opened. A man stepped out in a pressed uniform that looked too clean for field work, the insignia on his shoulders dull from years rather than polish. General Alden Voss, Commander of Strategic Operations. His name was spoken rarely and never casually. He wasn't the type to inspect recruits. He was the type who appeared when something classified was about to breathe again. No announcement. No escort. Just the slow crunch of his boots across gravel as every officer within 50 meters straightened instinctively. The instructors formed a line before he even reached them, trying to anticipate the reason for his arrival. Voss ignored them. His gaze moved once across the yard, the breaching rigs, the observation tower, the stunned faces frozen mid-salute, and then locked onto Calderon. He walked toward her without hesitation. Each step sounded deliberate, cutting through the silence that rippled outward with his approach. Calderon didn't move. Her rifle was slung low, safety engaged, hands steady at her sides. Around them, the crowd began to realize what was happening. The general stopped 2 feet away. His eyes dropped briefly to the worn badger patch on her sleeve, then rose to meet hers. Whatever he saw there made the corner of his mouth tighten, not in anger, but in recognition. For a heartbeat, the entire base seemed to hold its breath. Then he spoke. Not to the crowd. Not to the officers craning their necks to catch his words. Just to her. Task Force Relentless never disbands, he said quietly. It just sleeps. The words were soft, but they carried like a shot. Calderon didn't blink. Her jaw tightened slightly, a fraction of motion, as though a locked door in her mind had just opened. Yes, sir, she said, her voice barely audible. That was all. No salute, no formal exchange. But something invisible shifted between them, the weight of memory, of unfinished work, of people who had gone dark and stayed that way. Voss turned without another word. As he walked back toward the convoy, the murmurs began, thin, uncertain, nervous. The instructors looked lost, their authority dissolving in the wake of a sentence they didn't understand. The younger officers, the ones who had laughed loudest, were suddenly silent, their gazes darting between Calderon and the departing vehicles like witnesses to something sacred and dangerous. When the engine started again, the sound filled the hangar like a heartbeat. The convoy pulled away, taillights fading into the dusk. The yard remained motionless. Calderon finally exhaled. Her hands, still steady, resecured her rifle strap across her chest. A few steps away, one of the recruits tried to whisper, but his voice cracked halfway through the question. What's? Task Force Relentless. No one answered him. Calderon turned toward the open hangar bay, the wind catching the edge of her sleeve. The patch seemed darker now, the stitched badger head glinting faintly under the lights. It wasn't a relic anymore. It was a signal, one that had just been reactivated. Inside the administrative building, someone was already typing an incident report, logging the arrival of the unannounced convoy. The system would flag the visitor as classified, the details locked under black-level clearance. But the report would never reach the chain of command. Somewhere in the defense network, buried under encryption older than most of the officers on base, a dormant node had flickered back to life. Relentless protocol. Status, awakening. Out on the training field, Calderon adjusted her gloves, her expression unchanged. The recruits stared at her like she'd stepped out of a myth. The silence felt different now, not the quiet of indifference, but the kind that comes before orders. Before motion. Before a storm that everyone senses but no one can name. For the first time since she arrived, no one dared mock the patch. Within a week, Calderon was gone. Her bunk was stripped clean, her locker sealed under temporary clearance tags. No transfer notice. No reassignment orders. Just absence, the kind that spoke louder than explanation. The only thing left behind was the patch. The badger head, weathered and stubborn, pinned above the bed frame with a single brass tack. When the recruits noticed it, they didn't laugh. Not this time. The room that used to echo with jokes about Captain Thrift Store was quiet now, the kind of quiet reserved for memorials. Someone had written her name on the duty board, then scratched it out after the lieutenant barked that she was no longer part of this roster, but the mark remained, faint and deliberate, as if the name itself refused to fade. Rumors spread the way they always do when truth hides behind clearance. Some said she'd been reassigned to an Arctic training division. Others swore they'd seen her name flash on a restricted deployment list with the designation TF, R0, a classification nobody recognized, but everyone whispered like a curse. A few claimed they saw her at the airstrip before dawn, boarding a transport with a crew of unmarked operators. No insignia. No call signs. Just silent readiness. Weeks passed. The base went back to routine. Or tried to. But little things began to shift. Reports trickled down through unofficial channels, clean extractions, no civilian casualties, no traceable presence. High-risk zones cleared in hours instead of days. Satellite logs showed blink data windows, not interference, just absence. And on after-action summaries, one identifier kept appearing at the end of mission reports, always in the same place, always in the same coded font, R0. By then, everyone on base had stopped asking who it was. Deep down, they already knew. One night, during storm briefing, a new training directive came down from command. It arrived through encrypted channels, stamped with a clearance seal so rare the instructor hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single-page update to the tactical doctrine. No introduction, no author, no unit source. Just a title at the top. Adaptive Combat Doctrine, codename, Relentless. The room went still as the instructor read the content. It outlined a new form of engagement, flexible entry sequencing, variable posture transition, rapid adaptive countermaneuvers. It contradicted half the standard protocols, but made surgical sense, a design only someone who'd lived real combat would understand. At the bottom of the page, a single footnote, printed smaller than regulation type, caught everyone's eye. The Badger doesn't retreat. It regroups, ***. No one spoke. Some of the older sergeants exchanged glances, their faces pale under the fluorescent light. They'd heard that phrase before, buried in training archives, whispered in after-action debriefs of a unit that supposedly never existed. The next morning, the patch above Calderon's bunk was gone. No one saw who took it. But later that week, during night drills, a shipment of new tactical gear arrived, compact rigs, modified optics, holster systems that looked familiar. The same setup Calderon had worn. The recruits tested them in silence. The fit was perfect. The design efficient. The name printed discreetly inside each harness, our series Prototype 0. From that day on, the laughter never returned to Grey Point Base. They trained harder. Moved quieter. Watched their corners like she had. And sometimes, in the far edges of night drills, instructors swore they saw a silhouette standing by the observation tower, posture straight, weapons slung across her back in that same crossbody style. When the new recruits asked about the doctrine's origin, they were told the same thing every time. It came from Relentless. And though no one dared to say it aloud, everyone knew what it meant. Calderon hadn't vanished. She had become something larger than the patch, larger than the name. Somewhere out there, in the places where official maps blur and comms go silent, a voice still answered calls that never made it through formal channels. A quiet voice, calm and measured. Relentless actual, it would say. Send coordinates. And then the signal would fade, leaving only static and a line in every field operator's creed, newly etched beneath their insignia. The Badger doesn't retreat. It regroups ***.